This is how I give feedback to and coach some of the most influential leaders in the world.
I used some of one of my favorite tips of yours was that completely reframed my mind, because I thought
Guy Kawasaki asked me to give him feedback on his TED Talk. Now, if you don't know Guy Kawasaki, he was one of the chief evangelists at Apple. He was working closely with Steve Jobs to launch the Macintosh. He's an author, speaker, entrepreneur, and this is the exact feedback that I gave him on his TED Talk. Enjoy. Hey Guy, as promised, here's some feedback on your TED Talk called How to Embody Grace. Now, this is from a perspective of a viewer, an audience member who just happens to train other CEOs on public speaking. So let's get into it.
when I die, I want you to say that I helped you make a difference. I helped you dent the universe, make the world a better place, change the world. Every phrase that Steve Jobs ever used. And I've been dedicating myself to this process for about 5 years as a podcaster. I've interviewed remarkable people, and I gained a lot of information and inspiration from them. And what I figured out is that there's 3 stages in life.
I like the opening sentence because it makes you sound very humble, and I feel like I'm going to genuinely learn something of importance. And then you talked about all the people that you had interviewed. There could be a little bit more of a punch we could add. I feel like the setup is a tad bit too long for the introduction, and you're going to continue to dive into that, but I'll point it out as we go along.
Actually, I happen to love tricolons, so I'm going to use a tricolon right now.
This is the part where, when I watched it the first time, I paused it, and then I went to look up what a tricolon is. And then I got lost into the different examples of the tricolons. And then I forgot that I was watching the TED Talk in the first place and started doing other things. So when you introduce a new term, like tricolon, very early on in the presentation, if someone's not familiar with that, most of them will not take the time to figure out what the word is. And if they're watching it virtually, they might tune out to a certain degree at the start. So you want to avoid anything that could come across as confusing right at the start. Now, this completely depends on the audience you're speaking to. Perhaps the people you're speaking to, they'll relate to it. But on a TEDx stage, perhaps simpler language would have helped.
One tricolon is life progresses from growth to grit to grace. Another way of looking at it is that in the first third of your life, you're underpaid. In the second third of your life, you're overpaid. And in the final third of your life, you should be paying back.
2 examples of tricolons, I like that. My first thought was when you had those 2 tricolons, these are the things that people quote. These are the things that people remember. They're brief enough and they sound rhythmic, they sound catchy. So every time you did that throughout the presentation, I really liked it. Growth, grit, grace. I remember it just because you've said it. And it's so easy to remember that when I walk away from the talk and I think about, oh, what was that talk about? I can still remember those 3 words.
Today, the final third in life, really, I think, just the culmination of life, which is grace and graciousness. So I'm going to talk to you today about how to embody grace.
Now here, as someone who is not at that point of their life, where I'm thinking about grace, I'm still thinking about growth, I'm still thinking about grit, I was wondering if I'm not the right audience for this talk. Is this just for people in the third phase of their life when they're trying to give back? I'm not quite there yet. Is this message important to me? So maybe making it a little bit more clear who this is for. If it is only for people who are in that stage of their life, perhaps a more general audience can also benefit from it. What's the incentive for them to listen to it? Because if I would hear this, I would think, is this for me? Should I come back to this in 20 years? Maybe then I should listen to it. Or should I be thinking about grace as I'm going through growth and grit? So maybe we could have touched on that. I'm just keeping in mind that the TEDx audience is very wide, but sometimes they do have themes for specific types of people, and I don't have context to that. So do take that with a grain of salt.
Frankly, honestly, I believe that you can explain all of life with a tricolon, a top 10 format, or a 2x2 matrix. That's all you ever need. That's all you ever need. And I'm going to use 2 of those 3 today.
I've noticed this about you in general, Guy. Your humor is It works so well in your favor. In every one of your talks I've seen, every time you smile wide open and you have a joke in there, the audience loves you. And this is another example of that.
They were people who were truly remarkable, not rich, not famous, remarkable. People like Jane Goodall, Stacey Abrams, Vivek Murthy, Angela Duckworth, Katie Milkman, Bob Cialdini, Christy Yamaguchi, Roy Yamaguchi. And they so influenced my life. Step number one.
Now, I'll tell you, the only person I knew out of that was Bob Cialdini because I've read 3 of his books. But other than that, I didn't really know anybody. And I'm pretty sure a lot of the viewers watching might also not know them. But perhaps tell us a little bit about why these people are remarkable. Fill in the context for that, for people who might not know who these people are. And also, when you go through a laundry list of names that people are not familiar with, again, that adds another reason for people to think, well, I don't know what he's talking about right now, let me not listen to it. So you want to give them less reasons to tune out. And this could have been fixed with one quick sentence of Bob Cialdini, who wrote XYZ, and next person who did ABC, just a little bit of context.
I keep score because I want to be remembered in a way, as I said when I die, that I empowered you, that I helped you make a difference. I want people to say, Guy empowered me with his writing, his speaking, his podcasting, his investing, his advising. That's what he did. That's how I'm keeping score. That's one way. Second way is, what kind of kids did I help raise? Because I think kids reflect what you've done in life. So, damn, those kids, they better come out good. They're going to be a reflection on me. And when I say good, I don't mean, because they went to an Ivy League school. I could care less about that. I don't want them to go to school with all those plagiarists anyway. So, I change how I keep score. It's about the impact that I've had. How much did I help you make a difference? Number 3.
Here I'm wondering if you can turn that into a lesson for what the audience can do. So here you talk about your kids, you talk about what you're giving. What can the audience take away from this? So when you're reflecting back on your life, think about what can you do that other people can benefit from? What can you do X, Y, Z? So you go from I language to you language just so I can picture myself there. And earlier when you mentioned I was judging my score based on how much money I made, what the Apple stock was, as someone who does that right now, I would have liked some empathy in that moment. So I was just like you, or you might be thinking, hey, these things are really important to me, and at a certain point of my life, it was extremely important to me as well. That way, you're thinking exactly like I am, and then you could say, but my thought around this changed when ABC happened, or when I went into my third stage of grace, then I realized these things are actually not important. So you meet them where they're at first with a little bit of empathy, and then you give them a you-focused language where this is what you can do. Because right now I feel like I love how I'm hearing your story, but I'm not learning what I should be doing. So a more obvious connection between the two would have helped.
I will admit that there are times, when you feel superior to somebody and all that. And what I've figured out is...
I like how you say these things, that sometimes you feel superior to people, because then it's you admitting to your own beliefs, your own limitations. It makes you sound like a real human being who's learned a real lesson. So everything you're saying, I want to believe it because of how you're saying it and with the humility you're saying it with.
Almost everybody that you meet can do something better than you. Now, it may be making tacos, it may be surfing, it may be taking pictures.
When you said this phrase, I was listening to it while I was at the gym, it really stuck out to me as one of those quotes that people say and quote all the time, like Martin Luther King, I have a dream, JFK, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. This phrase was like one of those phrases to me that I would remember. So I would have emphasized that twice. So I would have said that one more time after you said it, just so people know how important it is.
Almost everybody that you meet can do something better than you.
And then I would say it again. I'll say it again. Almost everyone you meet can do something better than you. Because when you say it the second time, people know it's important and they have more time to let it sink in. I thought that was a really important phrase.
Got to be obligated to help society. It is an obligation. You need to fulfill that obligation. It's not something that it's nice to do. It's not something that you're being wonderful to do it. It's an obligation. It is a moral obligation to help people. You have an obligation to help people make the world a better place.
I felt like out of the points so far, number 4 felt the most generic and also had the most potential. You started off with that story of your dad. I would have liked that story fleshed out a bit more, because then the message would be a lot more emphasized. I felt like that the tail half of point 4 was a lot of repetition, and it didn't strike me as significant as the first 3. So if you had gone into more detail about your father there and then made the point, it would have helped me remember it more. Because even now, if you tell me what you just said, it is hard for me to remember, let alone tomorrow or next week. I don't think I'll remember it at all.
Listen, when I was in the 6th grade, an elementary school teacher, and I grew up in a very poor part of Hawaii.
Now, I will say, every time you start a point and you go into a story, it immediately sucks me right into your speech, because it's almost this novelty that I'm being introduced to, something new, a new story. I'm going to learn something new about you. So every time you start off with a story, immediately I'm listening.
You can only connect the dots looking backwards. So I connect the dots. 6th grade teacher tells my parents to put me in a private school. I get into the private school. I get into Stanford. I meet Mike Boych. Mike Boych hires me into Apple. This is not because I have qualifications.
Just on a note of delivery, I love how you take these short pauses and you really emphasize the words. Every single word you say is so crystal clear. It just helps it's easy on the ears. I love listening to you when you speak.
Overton window. Make it an Overton platform, an Overton patio.
I don't know what an Overton window or Overton platform is, so this would have been where I would not have gotten that analogy.
Form an Overton patio, okay? Help others succeed.
Quick reflection, this past story, point number 5, it was the best for me by far. I really resonated with the story. I was in there. You walked us through 6th grade all the way to where you are now, and we learned more about you. If there was a story like this for every single point, I would have remembered each of those stories, whereas I would have forgotten just the point. So again, going back to point 4, if we had more of that story of your dad, I felt like that point could have come across a bit stronger.
Because the rising tide floats all boats. Life is not a zero-sum game. About perplexity, it's also like Bard and Gemini, right? It's all these LLMs. You make the rising tide, and all boats will float. And the falling tide will take all boats down too. So think about this. Raise the tide. Life is not a zero-sum game.
I like how you said life is not a zero-sum game at the start and at the end. And since you've said it, I've quoted it to other people in the 24 hours that I've heard it. Just because you said it twice, it stuck out to me. I love that phrasing. And I also like how you use Perplexity's example in the middle there. But if I were to compare point 6 to point 5, I would still say point 5 is more memorable just because it had that story element into it. So if we could find a way to turn that Perplexity example into a conversation you had or a bit of a story, just give me something emotional, something that creates an image in my mind to remember. And there might be some people who don't know what Perplexity is, right? I'm sure they were there at the event and the audience at the event knows them, but the wider audience is watching this, they might not know it. So just keep that in mind, that the audience is wider than just the people immediately in front of you.
Punching down is absolutely despicable. Punching down means you go to SFO and you rip on the flight attendant, you rip on the person checking you in, you rip on the luggage handler, you rip on the waiter, you whip on the waitress because you're punching down, If you're a presidential candidate in South Carolina, you make fun of a New York Times reporter because of his neurological differences, right? That's punching down. You're a billionaire, you're a presidential candidate, you're making fun of a New York Times reporter because he has neurological difference. What the hell is wrong with you? That's punching down. What you should do is punch up. Take on these people. Don't be afraid. You know what? I've figured out that when you punch up, there are a lot of people watching you punch up, and they're cheering you on. Punch up. You cannot go wrong punching up.
I thought this point was a little a little too short. I would have liked some examples of what punching up is, in what specific situation. Can you give me a real life example of somebody who did punch up and it worked out for them? I need some sort of incentive to punch up, a situation to punch up in. I love the first half of it because you just talked about what not to do, and also some examples of that would have been great. Looking for imagery here, because without imagery, it's hard for me to just remember the general concept. And I felt like this point had probably the most potential in the points that I've seen so far to make it more memorable.
But instead of asking, what do you believe? Or why do you believe vaccinations work or don't work? Ask people, how did you come to believe this? Because the how shows what they went through to arrive at that place.
This is a very powerful concept. I love it because when you get people to walk through their decision making, walk through their belief, oftentimes that exploration alone makes them more aware. It just reminds me of my mom. She once told me not to cut my nails at night. And I said, why? She said, oh, because I said so. I said, yeah, but why? And then she realized it was because of some superstition she had learned from her mom, and she never investigated it until I asked. So this is a perfect example of how just asking how can have people question their own beliefs.
Mine is to learn how to apologize. What a skill apology is. And I'll give you the key to apology. The most important thing when you apologize is the words, I'm sorry, must pass through your lips. That's it. Not, oh, I didn't intend to do this. Oh, are you offended? Oh, did it hurt you? Not all those qualifications. Just say, I am sorry. I am sorry that the security of my company enables somebody else to get all your passwords and names, right? I am sorry. It's not that I never intended it. It's not that somebody else did something worse. I am sorry. That's the key. I am sorry.
I would have even had the audience say it with me because they were buying into the message. So I know it's hard to apologize, but try saying it with me. I am sorry. And then you get the audience to say it as well. That would have been great.
My wife and I were living with our son on Union Street in San Francisco, towards the Presidio at the end. That is a very nice part of San Francisco. So one day, I'm out in front of, I crack up even when I think about this story. I'm in front of our house, and I'm cutting the bougainvillea, okay? I'm cutting the hedge. This older white woman comes up to me and says, do you do lawns too? and I'm telling you, I just jumped on it. I said, oh, I'm Japanese American, so you think I'm the yard man, right? She goes, no, it's just you're doing such a great job. I want to know if you do lawns. Okay, so right there's social profiling, which is bad enough, but that's not the punchline. The punchline is, 2 weeks later, my father comes from Hawaii. I'm Sansei, third generation. He's Nisei. He served in the U.S. Army. All that good stuff, right? More American than American. And I said to him, Dad, let me tell you a story. This Haole woman came up to me and asked me as a yard man because I was cutting a hedge. And I thought he was going to go off on her, right? How dare she question you? You went to Stanford, you worked for Apple, you knew Steve Jobs, you've written books. How dare she ask you if you're the yard man, right? Okay, guess what? He says to me, son, Japanese guy, cutting bougainvillea bush in front of a house on Union Street. Statistically, most likely, you were the yard man. So he said, son, get over it. Take the high road. Give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she just wanted to know if you're a yard man. She wasn't making some kind of racial judgment. And you got to, son, learn how to ignore the small stuff. If you take something like that to heart and it gets in your head and rattles around in your mind, it's going to ruin your life. You're not going to be graceful and gracious. Ignore the small stuff. Now, I have one more thing. That's all. It stops at 0. It doesn't go negative. That's good. Ignore the small stuff. Now, I have one more thing. That's all. It stops at 0. It doesn't go negative. That's good. Are we in a rush? Is there like a bar mitzvah here next or something? All right.
I like how you said, and one more thing, very Apple-esque.
I'll show you a little video of somebody who was intent on looking out, making the right decision, But she made the wrong decision, and maybe the decision was even made for her. And I'll show you what happens. She's turning. Uh-oh. What am I trying to show you? I'm showing that so much of us, we spend so much of our life trying to make the right decision. What's the right wave? What's the right direction? What's the right strength of paddling? What should we do to make the right choice? I think that people who are graceful and gracious, what they do is they make a decision, and then what they do is they focus on making the decision right. Not making the right decision anymore. Make whatever decision right. And that's the last way to embody grace. Thank you very much.
I love that example of surfing at the end. It was a perfect metaphor to tie everything back together. If I were to tweak that again, I would not have introduced a new message at the end. Instead, I would have tried to reinforce all the messages that have been covered, because I just watched this entire thing right now. And if you ask me to tell you those 10 points, let's see. Don't sweat the small stuff. Different terminology for that. So you have make decisions right. You had something about raising your kids. What else did you have? Yeah, so I'm sure it'll come to me. I've literally just finished watching it, and I can't remember the 10 points, right? So you want to leave your audience with 3 points that they'll remember as opposed to 10 points that they'll forget. Now, I'm sure a lot of people are writing this down, but what can they quote? What I like to do is when I'm finishing up a presentation, I try to bring back 3 major points in 3 sentences, and I just put them on screen one at a time. So after our talk today, if you forget everything else, these are the 3 things you will still remember. And one of those could be make decisions right. Everyone has something to teach you. And number three could be give back to the community, whatever it might be, right? So you want to give them short phrases that they can remember long after you're done talking. And when you have stories before each of those phrases, that further reinforces the imagery so they remember. Because right now I'm having a tough time remembering some of those phrases. It's not a zero-sum game. That's the one that you said 2 times, and I still remember that out of your 20-minute presentation. So if I were to rework all of those, I would change the format to top 10 is fine, introduce the point, tell a story or analogy, and then make the point again. You reinforce it 2 times every single time, and then you also get the audience to say certain phrases so they're experiencing it, a lot like the apology example there. That was the other point, the apology one. And I would summarize it at the end, talk about all 10 points, or preferably if you can find 3 in that. I know you like tricolons, 3 in that they can remember. Just 3 sentences are much easier to remember than 10. And you revisit them at the end. So you use those 3 to connect all of the 10 points that you talk about, and you leave the audience with that. You don't want to end with a new concept, because now that's going to be the thing they remember, and they'll forget a lot of the earlier things you said. Overall, presentation-wise, your public speaking skills are bar none. They're amazing. Every single thing you said, even the times you stuttered, you played with it, the time was running out, you had no issue blending in on stage. I just feel like if we can change a presentation with keeping it memorable in mind, could be the best presentation in the world, but if people forget 10 minutes after you're done talking, it's not going to be as valuable as it could be. So I would have condensed some of that information into easy to remember sentences and ended it with that. So hopefully this was valuable, guys.